The biggest crashes in motorsport history. Motorsport is one of the most dangerous sports in the world. The athletes competing are putting their bodies on the line every time they race. The danger is really highlighted by some pretty awful crashes. So let's take a look at the biggest crashes in motorsport history. Romain Grosjean's lucky escape. When you talk about lucky escapes in motorsport, there is only one man to start with. The man who walked out of the fire. Romain Grosjean headed into the Bahrain Grand Prix looking to end a difficult season on a high. He started 19th on the grid, but got off the line well. As the cars went through turn 3, Grosjean moved across the track but didn't see the AlphaTauri of Daniil Kvyat on the inside of him. The two cars made contact, and Grosjean went flying into the metal barrier at around 120 miles per hour. The crash was so impactful that the metal barrier split in half, as did the Haas car Grosjean was in. A split fuel line led to a huge fire starting, which the Frenchman found himself sitting in. Grosjean was in the fire for around 28 seconds, with fans watching on worrying if he was going to make it out. Thanks in part to the brilliant work of the medical car, Grosjean managed to climb out of the wreckage. Despite being in an awful crash and covered in flames for what felt like ages, the Haas driver escaped with only minor injuries. A horrific crash that produced a crazy lucky escape. Valentino Rossi misses the bike by an inch. Across his 370 starts in MotoGP, Valentino Rossi has certainly seen his fair share of close calls and awful accidents. But he might not have gotten closer to disaster than at the 2020 Austrian Grand Prix. In a race weekend filled with accidents, lap 9 saw the chaos begin. Jonathan Zarco and Franco Morbidelli made contact heading into turn 3, and both fell off their bikes. Morbidelli's bike flew across the ground before taking off and heading back onto the track. That's where Rossi came extremely close to crashing into the stray bike himself. As he made the turn, I'm sure what he wasn't expecting to see was a bike going right across his face. You might not realise it in real time, but Valentino Rossi was inches away from an awful accident that not only would have ended his career, but probably his life. As the accident had initially happened behind him, Rossi had no idea of the troubles coming his way when he made that turn. The front camera of the 7-time world champion shows just how close the stray bike really came to making contact with Rossi's Yamaha. If Rossi was a tenth of a second faster, he would have been hit by the bike and the MotoGP would have seen the worst accident in the sport's history. Instead, everyone managed to walk away without any major injuries. That is one scary close call. Mark Webber's Red Bull takes flight in Valencia. Formula One cars are fast, very fast. But you would still be pretty surprised to see them take flight. But this is exactly what Red Bull's Mark Webber did. At the 2010 European Grand Prix, Webber had dropped from 2nd to 9th at the end of the first lap of the race. He made an early pit stop and faced some slower cars in front of him that he needed to pass in order to make up some places. One of the drivers in front of him was Heikki Kovalainen. There was no doubt that Webber was the faster driver, and it was just a matter of time until he overtook. As the two headed into the braking zone on the main straight, Kovalainen braked earlier than the Aussie expected. The Red Bull struck the rear tyre of the Lotus, and it sent Webber's car flying into the air. It somersaulted into the air and struck the advertising boards. Webber's car landed on its nose and the Aussie driver was stranded. Somehow, the Red Bull driver managed to walk out of the crash unharmed, despite his car spiralling in the air and smacking the barrier at well over 100 miles per hour. The accident was so forceful that Webber's brake pedal shattered on impact. The fact that he was still able to walk off unharmed is insane. Mikko Hirvonen's crash. 2010 must have been a pretty awful year for crashes in motorsport, considering we have 2 crashes from that year in this video. But when you see the awful crash that Mikko Hirvonen had in Finland, you will understand why it's in this video. The Finn driver had started the season well and was hoping for a big performance in his home rally. Having tasted victory across the border in Sweden, Vernonen had high hopes for the weekend. Uria was the section of road that the Ford driver was taking on, a piece of road located just miles from where he grew up. It's even the road that Hirvonen previously said he loved the most in the entire world. As he was drifting through the corners, Hirvonen began to oversteer slightly, causing the back end to step out. After going over a small jump, he smashed into the bank at over 100 miles per hour. After clipping the bank, there was only going to be one outcome. The car started rolling and just kept on rolling. The Ford flipped over multiple times before landing in a crumpled heap. Everyone watching knew that they had just witnessed one of the most dramatic moments in WRC history. Miraculously, both Hirvonen and his co-driver Jarmo Lehtinen were able to walk out of the crash unharmed. The roll cage that is inside of all WRC cars managed to hold together. It was easily the biggest crash of Finn's long career, and a scary one to watch for sure. Felipe Massa gets knocked out. Formula 1 is pretty scary to race in, but one thing that drivers certainly don't expect is metal objects flying towards them while they're going nearly 200 miles per hour. Well, that is what Felipe Massa saw when he was heading up to the end of the first sector in qualifying for the Hungarian Grand Prix. A year on from losing the world title in a heartbreaking fashion, Massa was having a difficult year with Ferrari. In the second round of qualifying, he was driving down to turn 4 at well over 150 miles per hour. But what Massa didn't know was that the suspension spring had fallen off the brawn car of Ruben Barrichello. The spring found itself on the fast part of the track, where it bounced up and smacked Massa in the head. He was instantly knocked unconscious and the car could not be stopped. He crashed head-on into the tyre barrier, and everyone watching had no idea what they had just seen. Fans didn't know that Massa had been hit by a spring, so the accident remains one of the most shocking ever watched on a Formula 1 track. The Brazilian was immediately airlifted to the nearest hospital, where surgery was performed on Massa. His injuries were life-threatening, and it took hours for the medical team to get him into a stable condition. After the accident, it was determined that Massa needed a titanium plate inserted into his skull if his racing career was ever going to continue. It was incredible that Felipe survived the accident and then got back into a Formula 1 car the very next season. What do you think is the biggest crash in motorsport? Put your thoughts in the comments down below, and while you're down there, hit the like button and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.